Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Sacred Stories of the Spirit. My name's Jordan Harcourt Hughes, and you're with me on the journey of consciousness in the world of work, this series of the podcast. This is series 3. And why would we look at consciousness in the world of work? Well, it's such an interesting time to be alive. There's so many different things happening. One of the things that I really worry about is that we are becoming too logical and too rational in our world of work. So for me, the great danger there is that we lose our connection with ourself. We lose our connection with our intuition, our imagination, and in doing that, we lose a really important sense of connection to our identity, our purpose, and our own unique path in the world. So my role through all of my creative practice, I believe, is to help bring you and others back to that sense of being in our embodied self, being aware, and being able to take ownership of our journey in whatever meaningful way is right for you. So I think it's important that we talk about the world of work because for many of us, that's where we do our thing. That's how we contribute and offer value to the world. For me, that's certainly true. And I think that there's so much room to grow and evolve in this space and really have good conversations about what it means to be conscious in the world of work. Again, I will go back to the show that I have been talking about a lot recently, which is the show Severance. If you haven't seen it, definitely check out series 1. It's described as a dystopian, and it can be a really dark perspective on the idea that when we go to work, we have to leave our whole personal lives at home. And in the future, there are ways that that they can plant a chip inside your brain to literally turn off your whole memory of your outside self. So you just become your work self. And I've experienced that. I've experienced having to leave myself at the door when I go to work. And I've already had conversations about this. You can have a look at the conversation with Catherine in the previous episode about that. She had some really interesting things to say, not necessarily in agreement with me, which is why I think, it's really good to get different perspectives on this. And this is partly what this podcast is about. I know I'm rambling a little bit. I'm supposed to be introducing this episode, but really what I wanted to say today is that the conversation that I'm having today with the gorgeous Evylyn Rose may seem a little bit obscure if we think about it in the world of work. So Evylyn is an intuitive tarot reader. So does tarot have anything to do with the world of work? Well, it depends what kind of work you do, I suppose. But I think for me, what struck me with Evylyn is how much integration work that she has done. So she's not only an intuitive tarot reader. So she's from the US, and not only is she an intuitive tarot reader, but she has spent time in the military. So she is an Army veteran, and those things immediately you don't think make any sense together, tarot reading and being in the Army. But when you see young Evylyn kind of process what she's experienced in her life, there's a lot there. And she's also really well educated, very self-aware, and she's got a lot to share, and particularly her lens on how storytelling is important, particularly when we look at the broader social things playing out in the world today. Evylyn and I brought all of this together in this podcast conversation. It's only short. We kind of lightly touch on a whole bunch of different things, but for me, it's really valuable to see someone who can be present with her work, with her contribution to the world, and have done all the personal journeying to allow herself to be present with what she wants to give the world, and call that her world of work. I think it's really powerful. I think there's something in that for all of us to understand, learn, and know. And deep at the heart of it is integration, integrating the personal and the professional, integrating all of our experiences, all of our journey, all the richness of our life journey into what we give in service of others. Uh, Now, the one thing I think is particularly interesting today about this conversation is the idea of spiraling. So, we have this idea that spiraling is this negative thing, and it always has this downward trajectory. We are spiraling downwards. It makes us sound like we've lost control. We're losing our grip. But actually, what if spiraling meant something else completely? So that's what we're going to explore today. I really am excited to share this episode with you. Let's dive in. Well, Evelyn, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited about the conversation that we're going to have.
Yes, same here. Got a lot to say.
Now, I think one of the things I'm thrilled about is that I think, I've had a look at your story and your website, and I was just blown away by how much integration work you seem to have done. So you have brought so many different pieces of the puzzle together, and from personal to spiritual to professional, you're all here, and it's everything. But for me, that's not an easy thing. I think a lot of people struggle with that. Everyone, lives a lot of their life in these kind of compartments. And here we are with this beautiful person that's kind of found a way to bring it all together. So I'm so excited to hear your story. And to me, it's a really interesting and unique one. So I just want to hear everything. But you're an intuitive tarot reader. You're also a US Army veteran, and you've had a multifaceted career in your education, healthcare, federal service. Like, it's a really complex mix. Um, and I think one of the things where I want to start is that you've described your story as a spiral. Tell me about the spiral. I love circles. They're one of my favorite things. And the spiral is not too far away from the circle.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess I should start off providing a little context for how I
Yeah.
came to choose that word spiral. So I don't hide that I definitely very Wiccan flavored witch. So a lot of my early learning within witchcraft and paganism was through this Wiccan lens. And a lot of my learning was online and through books. And they would always talk about like the Wiccan wheel of the year and how
Okay.
time is this wheel and like cycles. And then back in 2020, I'm listening to lots and lots of podcasts. And I came across Lindsay Mack, and she does the Terror for the Wild Soul, and she talks about how intuition flows in a spiral. And so, like, my brain kind of started putting two and two together, but
Yes.
it still took a while to like fully integrate. And of course, then in comes the science teacher and like digging into the science and you get into like quantum physics, and without breaking any brains, you get quantum physics is basically saying that time as we understand it as linear is just an
Yes.
illusion. It has to do with entanglement, the different forces that are in play. And so for me, I kind of put all three of those things together, and I still struggled, right? Like, I'm not going to pretend like, oh, I've got this all figured out. I'm still in that spiral. I'm
Yeah.
alive and breathing. I'm still spiraling. And so what I started to see was a lot of the struggles I've dealt with depression, PTSD, anxieties. You'll even see me probably while we're talking right now, you can see me fidget a little bit. You might catch I'll have like a pen, I'll try to not click it, but you'll see the anxiety come out. It's there. And so I started to look at how I'd been dealing with processing a lot of these experiences in my life.
Yeah.
All of us can relate to the way human memory works. And you could be just sitting in like a boardroom meeting and somebody just says a thing and your brain like goes way back in time to some random event that happened. For especially those of us with a trauma brain, we get stuck sometimes replaying these traumas, and like so many things will take us there. And I had been spending so much of my life putting it in this linear fashion, saying like
Yes.
this is how my story is. And even though there were revisions to the story and there are so many new chapters, there were a lot of chapters. I really started to realize, wait a minute, this is not the way to look at this. Why do I see patterns emerging? And you can do it through the psychological lens and psychoanalyze me and say, well, you're showing these personality characteristics and traits, or oh, this, that, or the other thing, and behaviors. But for me, what I found is it's really my way of linearly looking at it, seeing it as this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And each one was this individual story. But
Yes.
when I look at it like a spiral, and now the spiral may not be this perfect little spiral like we like to draw and doodle, it might be like a spiral that kind of zigzags around the page. But when I'd hit a return on the spiral, it's that same lesson, totally different event, totally different emotional
Yeah.
reactions, or in some cases the same, because I did not learn all my lessons very well the first time. So I really have, as I go through the spiral and I put everything within that framework,
Yeah.
it makes sense. Like, those were a series of mini lessons within like a unit. So think of it like being a teacher, right? And you got the textbook, and it's like you got lesson one, lesson two, lesson three. Okay, that was module one. All right, let's move on to module two. And that's kind of how life, I'm seeing it, is it's a spiral. It's this
Yeah.
book where it's modules and lessons, and each lesson ties, and then each module builds on the last. It's not a straight line. You've got to refer back and sometimes go through the same challenges again.
Yeah. Do you think this is just kind of a sidebar question, but do you think that, this whole idea that time is not linear, we don't just go from 1 to 2 to 3, and do you think that's enough of a kind of complete breakdown in how we've been taught to understand the world that we live in, that that's just going to create monumental collapse? So once we start not thinking in that way, everything will shift.
Well, I mean, when we look historically, a lot of people for longest of times worked with this mindset of time
Mm.
in cycles. We see it throughout ancient texts. We
Yeah.
see it in modern reconstruction, like within paganism. We have a lot of like reconstructing Celtic faith and Norse faith. There is this like pull toward, okay, let's stop thinking how society has been teaching us to think in
Yes.
this line, and let's start thinking in the spiral or in a wheel. And when we made the shift where we changed from that more cyclical thinking into this linear thinking, there wasn't a major apocalypse. So I'm like, I think we're going to be fine.
Okay.
We just have to each get there, and we have to get there in our own time. If you told
Yeah.
me you're thinking about this wrong, I'd have been like, no, I'm doing me. Thank you. Bye.
Yes. Yeah,
So yeah,
it's a nice
we'll
word.
get there. We'll get there, I think.
So what is the connecting thread for you in the spiral?
So I love that question, and it's probably going to be my shortest answer this entire conversation. Me, it's me.
Yes,
That's
of
my
course it
connecting.
is. Of course it is.
Yeah, and so I hope the same is true of everybody's spiral. Is I hope it's you that you find in your spiral, because I'm a
Yes.
little
Uh,
worried if it's not.
well, beautiful wish for everyone. I love it. And simple,
Yes.
but really profound as well. I'm really interested in the fact that you are this spiritual person, but you also willingly went on a journey to into the military, so into the US Army. Tell me about that. What ignited that desire?
So I'm sure if anybody's listening and is an astrologer and decides to pull up my chart, they'll probably be able
Okay.
to tell you all the exact reasons
Yeah.
why. But for me, it was definitely a combination of like that love for country, that love for the values of the founding fathers. American history is rife with all kinds of bad choices and really, really terrible decisions, a lot of othering of other people. I don't think our nation is alone in that, kind of having that kind of history. And at the time when those things were happening, it was phenomena around the world.
Mm.
We like to talk about how globalization is like this thing that's happened. I'm like, but we kind of been sharing all the same things. We're just faster at it now.
Yes.
And so I have this love for country. I have this love for the ideas. There were so many, starting up a new country is hard. Trying to get everything you need,
Yes.
because you need people with the money. You need the people with the influence. You need the people
Yeah.
with the resources. You need the brains. You need the specialized skills and trades. And so you have to get everybody on board to create this grand experiment in democracy in a way that at that point in time hadn't been attempted really. And I mean, some people forget that our initial constitution kind of had to get, a little thrown out the window not too long after we wrote it. And we had to like revise significantly not long after. And throughout the whole process, the founding fathers and all those involved, so not just the men, women were also included. Well, within society at the time were included. And they really had to, trying to find the words for it. They had to weave in what they wanted to be lasting. What would be that legacy? What is America, not necessarily in that moment, cons- working within the constraints of the moment, moving into the future? What is everything everybody could possibly want, could possibly need? How do we get these ideals to fit? How do we get everybody on board with our ideas, but have our constitution, have these guiding documents fit in such a way that no matter what happens or who comes in, we're always striving toward those ideas. And I love the ideals. I could look around me. So let's see, I went into, let's see, this would have been, I went into the Army. So this would have been in Bush's second term, Bush Jr. That is.
Yep.
So uh, so for me, this was post 9/11. We're seeing
Yeah.
all this stuff. We're seeing the war on terrorism. We're having revelations about, oh yeah, you know those weapons of mass destruction we talked about? We're seeing so much stuff that's going horribly wrong.
Mm.
And I was blissfully forgiven or forgiving, I should say, because I understood that there was more to it. Yes,
Yeah.
there are people with political agendas, there's greed, there's bad actors, there's always that. You look throughout the history of most countries, you can find that.
Mm.
It's nothing new. It's, I think, part of the human condition. And if we didn't have so much diversity among us, then we would, we wouldn't have that, or maybe that's all we have. But simultaneously, without it, we don't know what to look for. So I'm going way off. I will go on tangents.
It's a great.
So for me, I wanted to make sure that we didn't lose sight of that.
Mm.
I think when I finally was like, you know what, let's do this, it was when they were starting to talk about bringing back the draft and including women into the draft. And at the time, my younger siblings were still, in like school age. Like I had just graduated, so they were still working their way through school, and that worried me. This idea of people who maybe didn't
Yes.
share my values being forced into this. Like I didn't
Mm.
agree with that war. I
Yeah.
thought, a lot of the reasoning behind it was wrong. I did not particularly agree with the administration on the vast majority of their policies. And some of the things that they would say outright were derogatory toward myself and many aspects of myself. But yet it was still my country. It was still
Yeah.
the Constitution. I wasn't swearing oaths to them. Yes, part of the oath said I would follow, my commander
Yes.
in chief and all that, but it was the lawful orders. And what
Mm.
determined if something was lawful or not is that Constitution. And
Mm.
that Constitution has our ideals embedded within it. And so for me, I was like, I'm joining because some doesn't want to, or isn't for them, or they can't. And so that's what took me into the army.
I'm really interested in this idea that you love you love the ideals, and you know that so many people are seeing what's happening and saying this is not American, this is not America. Where is it all coming from then? Who is the bad actor? Or who are the actors painting a country that was so passionate about these founding principles, and here we're seeing these things that are so not that, and so many people saying this is not us, and yet it's still pervasive and happening. It's happening.
It is, and we're not alone in it. We're not the first, we're not the only. Um, America from its onset, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, was at that founding, there were already so many disagreements. And one of the things we find within rise of like fully autocratic, fully authoritarian and fascist, like everybody keeps talking about the fascist handbook. This is what they're referring to is the
Mm.
easiest and quickest way to divide a nation or a society is to find what were the things you didn't agree on at the very beginning of the founding of this group. If you can pick that apart, and I mean, it's not even just nations. I mean, if you have a church, if you have a coven, if you have a whatever was not fully 100% agreed upon, but we all said, you know what, okay, we'll go with it.
Yeah,
If
wow.
you can target that, you can split everybody up. And that's kind of what happened for us was there were disagreements about what should America be? Who is American? How does citizenship work? And so right now our biggest thing dividing us is immigration. Speaking as an older millennial, I've been watching the immigration debate be this huge thing. And my family were immigrants when they came here. My grandmother came as I think she was like 5 or 6 when she came to America. She was born in 1942 in Ukraine. My great-grandmother and my grandmother, I'm assuming, and many of the members of the family, they were in Nazi concentration camps. And when they finally got liberated, they finally break free. Liberators turn into the new aggressors, and then other aggressors try to come
Mm.
in as
Yeah.
liberators. And so family fled. They fled Ukraine. They were like, "We gotta
Yeah.
get out of here." And my older brother likes to look into like the genealogy stuff because that's some trauma. You want to talk deep traumas, you go back to the Holocaust, you go back to World
Yes.
War II. And Ukraine was already had all kinds of ancestral trauma going on and
Yes.
some very recent before that. So when he dug through the records, he found like the manifest and the documents from that our great grandfather would have filled out. And it was very interesting to us because we know we're Ukrainian. We know we came from Ukraine. We
Yes.
know these things about us, but that paperwork sure the heck said Poland in Polish.
Yeah.
So I sit here and I'm like, well, this is how all the families escaped. Like,
Yeah.
this is why we came to America, but that's not what everybody agrees on. And so it's so easy to divide that because if your belief differs a little bit,
Yes.
if you are against people coming over to the country to have their babies, then you're now the other because, well, we don't believe that. So now you've put us into an us versus them
Yeah.
camp. And once you're there, it's so hard to break out of that
Yes.
thinking because you identify with it. So we're stuck trying. This is why I love this idea of the sacred stories
Yes.
and trying to reinvent our stories or rewrite them or
Yeah.
just explore them. It's like, when was the last time you picked up the copy of your book of your life and said, okay, who am I? What do I believe and why? Where did this come from?
Yeah.
And we're so stuck in the us versus them that we have to start doing that because if we don't, we are not going to survive this.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that sounds very cataclysmic and we can debate what I mean by survive,
Yeah.
but we are not going to come out as the America that America has always been, even if they keep calling it America.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting, and I thank you, actually. I think it's a lovely, insight, and, the one last question that I will have for you about your time in the military is you were a combat medic, in the military. So how did that inform who you are as a healer today?
So, for full transparency, because I know as a veteran myself, I get annoyed by this if it's not clear.
Yes.
I personally did not serve in a combat zone.
Yeah.
I was not actively in real combat situations.
Yeah.
So, the designation of combat medic is just a description of the job
Yes.
and what my training involved. So now that I've gotten that
Yeah.
disclaimer out the way, so when you're in the army and you are one of these medics, a lot of times you will get people from throughout the unit, sometimes other units, they find out you're a medic and it's immediately like they're coming to you with all
Uh,
kinds of questions. And even if they were coming to me to ask me about like, hey, do you think I just messed up my elbow? Like, can you take a look and should I go to, sick call in the morning? And I would have to like I would listen and like I don't know how much of it was like the empathy or just like hearing it, but they would have these underlying fears and
mm,
concerns, and those could range from the like, oh God, I hope something is wrong so maybe I can get on profile and have a break because I am burnt out to the like, oh God, please don't be anything serious because this is my life and my
yeah,
livelihood and my children are depending on me to be fine.
yes,
So it could range a whole spectrum
yes,
of
yes,
what those fears were, but sometimes it would just be they needed somebody that they could sit in a room and they could say some things that they
um,
knew weren't going to spread that around, where if their voice kind of choked up a little bit or they got a little misty-eyed, like nobody was going to start talking about like discharging them or,
yeah,
um, laundering their dirty secrets,
yeah,
like, and so for me, that was when I realized, like, there's more to whether it's healthcare or any other healing modality. They need more than just a, "Hey, can you check to make sure I didn't mess up my elbow?" They
mm,
need to know, they need to be reassured, they need to be validated, they need to be reminded that they're not alone and that they're
mm,
okay and that they do belong and that they are wanted and needed and loved in this world. So, there was definitely a lot to medic and healer.
good. Okay. Well, listen, let's move on to deconstructing and reimagining narratives because I think this, core to your work now. But what myths have you had to dismantle in yourself? And what new stories kind of have emerged in their place?
So there's so many personal myths there. Some of them many people can relate to. I won't say all because we've all lived different experiences. Some of us grew up with different households, but among some of the commons, especially those of us who maybe had dysfunction within the home, or maybe the parents are coming from dysfunction themselves, don't know how to be better or they're like, "Well, I'm better than my parents were, so
Yeah.
you'll be good." And so a lot of my early myths that I had to work on were surrounding self-worth and
Yes.
self-confidence, dealing with, again, for the astrologers out there, that Pisces martyrdom, like full on victimization, even as I'm like, I'm not a victim, but you won't believe what happened to me. So having to learn to reframe a lot of that,
Yes.
being able to challenge that kind of thinking. There was some things that early on I had been told about myself that simply weren't true, but the source that it's coming from, these are supposed to be the people who are closest to me, know me the best. And like, so with the army, I like that was '05. So that was like a year after I graduated from high school that I went into the military.
Okay.
But I was first drawn to the military like when I first entered high school. Like, and the first time I talked with a recruiter, I was like, oh, I'm kind of interested in this. I could have been like ROTC through high school and like had college paid for before I even like
Oh,
went full time into the military. But I was reminded that I was lazy and didn't like to run, and that I hated listening to what other people had to say and following directions. And I would hate the army and it's not for me. And then of course post 9/11, it's one of those like, don't go, you'll die. Never tell people that, because if anything, that's gonna make them go even if they shouldn't go. So don't tell people that,
yeah.
especially young people who are still in the throes of, just they're coming out of puberty brain. Give them time to find themselves. So there was a lot of having to look at those stories that I'm telling myself that they're not even my stories. Like
Yeah.
somebody else wrote
Yeah.
these stories for me, and it's like, and for many different reasons. Some of them were good intentions, but they
Yeah.
weren't me.
I think it's a really interesting point that you make. And I wonder if there's something that we all need to think about and do in the sense that we don't teach people to really interrogate the stories that they tell us about ourselves. So, and I think often it's because it's our nearest and dearest. It's the people closest to us that tell us you are this thing or you are not that kind of person. And we don't even think sometimes to not adopt it because we think they should know better. I think for me, part of the whole process of sacred storytelling is learning how to trust our own story and not necessarily taking on other people's idea of what our story is, because I don't think that gets us anywhere good a lot of the time.
Yes, I definitely agree. It's hard to reconcile some of it because we
Yes.
do begin to write our own stories and we do merge those stories with those other stories that
Yes.
other people have written for us. So when we do finally challenge those stories, when we finally wake up and go, wait a minute, that voice that pops in my head that is berating me and reminding me not to do this thing or that I'm not enough for whatever reason, that voice was what inspired, what you emulated, like when we learn to write, we often emulate like other writers
Mm,
before we find our own voice. And
yes.
that's kind of what happens in our own storytelling. So now I've deconstructed these stories and now I have to look at these stories that I did tell myself that is me. And wow, that's terrible of me to say that to myself. I need to reverse this. So like I said, a lot
Yeah.
of rewriting of stories has gone on throughout my adulthood. And then, so another thing working on is having to challenge narratives where, like particularly involving reality. What is real?
Oh,
What is
yes.
authentic? What is
Absolutely.
true? What is
Yes.
concrete? What is like truth? And there's so much out there where they're like, well, science says that's not real, and it's like, well, science doesn't say that, and it's like, oh, well, you know this is what reality is. You have these 5 senses and that's it. If you can't do it with sight, taste, smell, hearing, like touch, if you can't do any of those, then it's not real. And I'm like, that's not at all what science says. Science tells us that there are other senses. We just can't quantify them. We can't use them in testing and, within a lab. It's observing them is incredibly difficult. So we, either don't have the technology or we just don't because the return on it isn't very helpful. Science doesn't say this is what reality is. Science just helps us try to work out what reality is. Like, if
Yes.
I pick up a stone, is this stone obsidian or is this, a chunk of coal? Can I warm myself with this thing or will I blow myself up? But science doesn't say that reality is limited. If anything, science continues to go expand. It's constantly changing. I could go on for
Oh,
hours on this. I
I
nerd out on
do.
science.
And again, possibly a whole nother podcast conversation. The thing that
Oh,
I think
yes.
is challenging is that sometimes we hear scientists, so singular scientists, that will tell us this is what science is and what science is not. So I think we have to be mindful that, we have to bring our own interpretation and not necessarily listen to people who've gone down a dogmatic path of saying this is what science is. That, yes, I love the idea that science is ever evolving, ever expanding, and we continue to shift our understanding of what we can do, what we can see, what we can feel. And I think what I also think is important is that lived experience of being valid, even when we can't quantify something, if we've lived it, if we've experienced it, then we can accept that as our truth as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I definitely appreciated we find it a lot within shamanistic paths where they teach that this reality is just a shared dream.
Mm.
And we see that within quantum physics and studying like science at that quantum level is everything we're taught early on, everything is made of matter and atoms
Yes.
and molecules, and then you get these chemical reactions. But the reality is everything is energy. Everything is energy. It all is connected and transforms because of energy. And it's like thinking about reality, even something as concrete as matter within an energetic framework, and it expands the universe. And now you wonder why our universe is expanding. It's like I'm saying it metaphorically, but maybe there's the yet to be discovered explanations.
Yes.
And also, reality doesn't always need words. I think of times when people in trials for different psychedelics to try to see, like, could they help medicinally and stuff like that. You hear them tell the story of how, like, reality will completely shift and change on them. And even though what they experienced during that moment, anybody sitting in the room with them could be like, yeah, no, they were just laying there totally like just touching their face. And it didn't make their experience less real. Their experience was still 100% real.
Mm.
And nobody needs to understand that except for them. They're the only ones who need to understand their experience. And I will never tell somebody that something that happened internally is not real because that is their lived experience.
Yes, yes, I love that. So let's talk about tarot, which for you I think is not just a practice of divination, but storytelling. So, we're talking about stories on the podcast. Tarot as a storytelling opportunity is, I think, a wonderful thing to explore. So, how do you think it helps people connect with a sense of belonging and purpose in, fractured times?
So within tarot, one of the things I love about tarot, and again, this is part of the part science, part psychology, part
Yeah.
mystic, like all blended together in this beautiful cocoon, I guess. And so it was initially created with this idea of like archetypes and like the soul's journey. So you hear a lot about from tarot enthusiasts and tarot readers and professionals about like the fool's journey. Like you start at the fool and you work your way and eventually they get to the world. But going back to that spiral nature of life, it doesn't necessarily work that way. You could totally be, having like an emperor, like, dude, I'm in charge and I'm authoritative, but then simultaneously also have that full energy like right there mingled in and like, dude, calm down. Like it's you're gonna send everybody over that cliff if you don't stop. Like just it's okay.
Yeah.
Relax. Ease into this power. And so within tarot, again, you have your major arcana, which is that fool's journey, but then you also have your minor arcana. And they're supposed to be like your day to day. And each of those are in suit. So this is your pentacles, your swords, your cups, and your wands. And within each one, they all start with an ace, which is usually like contains the whole potential of that suit. And then it goes all the way through to 10, and then of course you get to your court cards. But like from the ace to the 10 is in itself another journey
Mm.
within that.
Okay.
And then when you get to the court cards, those also are like little mini journeys with your page starting off as like the brand new kid, like venturing out into the world. And then you get to your night that's like, ooh, I'm ready to go. So think like your teenagers.
Yeah.
And then they're like, I'm grown now. Let me do the thing. And then you get to the queen and you're starting to get mature and you've got this wisdom coming in. You know some things. And then by the time you get to the king, it's like, not only do I know some things, but I can guide entire nations through this. And so it's like a mini version of the journey because there's only four cards in the court
Yeah.
cards, but it still expands within it.
Yeah.
Um, so every part of tarot tells us about something where we are within our own stories. It
Yeah.
helps us to see where each thing is. So if I do a spread, and whether it's only say 3 cards or 30 cards, which don't do 30, it's a lot. You will be there for a long time breaking this down for somebody.
Wow.
Because it's not just the individual, all of the potential wisdom and symbolism involved within it. It's also where that's placed within that spread. And
Mhm.
there's the individual message, but then there's the message within the whole of the entirety of that spread. And then if there is a specific question or circumstance that the spread is for, there is context there. And so you have like a little mini storytelling session right
Yes.
there. And so for me, I think that these are tarot allows us to tell those or explore at least those stories that we're telling ourselves, but also like what we aren't paying attention to. So like what is it that we're saying, but what might be the reality? So I like some of the portrayals of like the four of cups where it's like well you just had the three of cups where you had celebration and togetherness and joy and friendship, and then you get to the four of cups and it's like this little loner and like the arms folded and like there's this little cup coming out of the clouds saying like hey
Oh,
everything's still here, the joy's still here, and they're just like no I'm gonna sit over here thank you very much with these other cups like and not being open to those other experiences. So um tarot as a whole, like if you use it for storytelling, if you take it for this approach to uncovering, you start to see where you are, why you might have gotten there, and where you could go with it. And it's all about choice. I absolutely hate the idea of like predictions and like I could tell you the
yes.
future and let me tell you what's coming up. And I'm like, well, no, it's potentials. What could happen if you keep telling yourself the story that you're telling yourself? If
Uh,
you keep putting on the blinders that you're putting on,
uh,
here's where you could find yourself. Do you like that? No?
yeah.
Okay, let's start taking the blinders off. Let's start seeing how we can reshape this story.
Yeah.
It's almost like a more storytelling, fun way of doing cognitive behavioral therapy,
Yeah.
where I'm going to change your behaviors by changing your feelings, which we do by changing your thoughts.
Yeah.
And while I love CPT and I will 100% from the psychology, science minded perspective
Yeah.
encourage people to do it, we can also do it more fun through tarot.
And it's important.
It
So,
is.
how do you see storytelling then on a sacred level, on a personal, excuse me, on a personal level and collective level as medicine when we're navigating crises?
So
It's a big one.
we have, yeah. So we have been telling stories as medicine for as far back as I think there's been communication. And I mean, you just looking at the natural world and whether or not you personally want to ascribe to evolution as has um, I don't wanna discredit anybody who doesn't, because there's usually nuances behind it,
Oh,
and I'm happy to have the scientific conversations to help them along with understanding, like, "Okay, here's what the science actually says versus what we think it says," which for many people, we forget there's what science says and what we think science says, and they often
yes.
don't connect. Unless you are a scientist, especially working in this particular field, the message is coming out of, a lot of times we just don't even understand
Yeah.
what they're saying. So it's not a judgment, it's just a pet peeve of mine. But as far back as we've had communication, so this, I mean, I don't think of a single entity in nature that doesn't communicate in some way. I suspect even amoebas have some version of communication.
Mhm.
There might be, some very early on instances, that eventually led to the amoebas. Maybe they struggle to like, maybe they're floating alone in the little world, like, man, I really wish I could talk to this other guy. I don't know,
Yeah.
but we've been using storytelling. We have cave drawings. We have things inscribed in stone and clay tablets. We have things on paper that we know used to say things, but they're now so ancient that, they've deteriorated and it's questionable exactly what they say. But we know that we've been communicating things. And every instance of it is showing some sort of storytelling. Even when we look at like caves where we see just handprints on the wall, some people are like, "Yay, they put their hands on the wall like the toddler, in the kitchen when they were, driving you up a wall." And it's like, but when you put it within context of everything else found within that same archaeological site, you start to realize, wow, we don't know exactly what we did. We can only infer, but there's a story to this. There is meaning and
Yeah.
purpose. And it's not entertainment. We think of storytelling as entertainment. And don't get me wrong, I love going to a movie. I love reading books and fiction, and I will happily watch a stage play, and I will be thoroughly entertained in the meantime. But there's so much more to it. We get
Yeah.
so much meaning. And then if you don't believe it, talk to any, particularly American women. Ask some American women growing up about the messages they received through Disney movies.
Yeah.
Yes. Storytelling is not just entertainment. We embody what we're
Yes.
being told.
Yes.
And then we get confused why our Prince Charming is now running off with somebody else and it did not fit the narrative at all.
Yes.
But again, more topics. We could totally go on for
Totally.
hours. So for me, stories, whether we're telling it through tarot, whether it's something we're just telling ourselves, whether it's something we're sharing with somebody else, stories are meant to share. It could be sharing knowledge, it could be sharing
Mm.
information, it could be sharing warnings.
Yeah.
So if you're going to find medicine, it's going to be in the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I know that we've been talking for a while, and I think we both agreed that there's so many things to talk about. So we could go on, but we won't today. But I do
Okay.
just want to end on just your guidance and tips for other people that are maybe struggling with what you have done so beautifully, which is the active integration. So there are so many different parts of you that you've been able to integrate. So from the mystic, the scholar, the teacher, lived experience in army and healthcare. There's so much there. First of all, what do you think is what are your key ways of being in a space which is not necessarily your space? And how do you encourage other people to move into a space that isn't necessarily a comfortable space, but is valuable for moving into a more integrated sense of wholeness?
So the one thing I would definitely say and highlight is breathe no
Yeah.
matter where you're at.
Yeah.
If it's like, I don't want to do this, or you're like, okay, I have to do this, I've got no choice, or oh my God, I'm in full crisis mode. No matter what, breathe.
Yes.
The best advice I ever got was from a VA nurse, and I'm on the phone with her in the middle of like anxiety attack, and she's like, "Breathe." She's like, "All you need is the next breath." She's like,
Yeah.
"No matter what, all you need is the next breath. If you've breathed, you survive.
Yeah.
Okay, now breathe again. You survive." So no matter where you're at in your journey, even if you are like, I don't want to go there right now because I got too much stuff. And you know what? I like that I'm angry right now and I like this us versus them dynamic. I think I'm going to stay here for a while. If that's where you are, that's where you are. But remember to breathe, because eventually you're going to reach the point where you're going to be like, God, I don't know what's happening here. Breathe.
Yeah.
And find that thing that anchors you. So for me, tarot is part of that. There's meditation, mindfulness, all these things have scientific basis to why we do them. But some of us, it might be going out into nature, going to the beach and hearing the sounds of the waves, or going into the woods. And I'm definitely one of those people where whatever that chemical is the trees give off,
Yeah.
like I feeds my soul. Maybe it's the rosary, saying your rosary or your prayers at night, or finding your church community, or whatever is your spiritual path. Or maybe you're just a birder and it's like the idea of like being like, oh my God, grab the binoculars. If that's your thing,
Yeah.
whatever it is, find that thing that anchors you,
Yeah.
brings you back into the here and the now. Because no matter what you do with your story, it only gets better if you can be here
Okay.
and
So
now.
I love it. So I love it because it's applicable everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are, anywhere it works to just sit, take a moment, breathe, figure out where you are. Then what? So, for people that are stepping into a new phase of life, are thinking about what could I reimagine or rethink or just new? Like what are your tips for people to take that next step?
My goodness, the sky's the limit.
Yes.
And just a reminder for those of you who maybe didn't pay attention in your earth science classes back in high school, the sky just keeps going. Like literally, the atmosphere is just a collection of gases pulled down towards Earth's center of gravity. That's literally it. So, literally to the edges of the universe, and we've only mapped and not fully mapped, but we've only observed the observable universe. It keeps going. So there are no limits, is what I'm saying here. Discover, be you. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, like I'm still spiraling. I've just finally reached that point where I'm done letting anything else dictate for me. Like, it is terrifying to be launching a business and saying, "Come get tarot readings from me," in a society where, like, half the people think I'm, a gimmick. Like, it's terrifying to do that. And at a time with such economic uncertainty, it's terrifying. But simultaneously, like, I have tried so many other things. And while I am 100% proud of every service role I've ever stepped into, yes, even sitting there as a cashier in a store, while I am proud of all that I have done before, I never fully fit. There's a reason why I kept moving on and trying different things. And it
Yeah.
is okay for you to do that too. And especially for our young listeners
Yes.
who are like, I don't even know what I want to do in the
Yeah.
future. Do something. It's okay. Just do something. Because whatever your next step is, it's part of your spiral. And
Yes.
if you don't learn the lesson this time, don't worry. You're going to spiral back around to it later. You'll get there.
Yeah. No, I think it's gorgeous, and I love, when I was looking at your tarot website, one of the things that just sent shivers down my spine is the fact that I'd seen you have this really full journey and do so many different things, but you also saying, "I'm my full self, and I can bring my full self to this role." And I think that's
Yes.
we all want, isn't it? We will all want to bring our full self. Where can people find you? Where can people connect and find out more about your
Oh,
business?
so so basically, literally, if you search for Evylyn Rose, and now the trick is you have to spell Evelyn Evylyn, because yes, there are several other Evelyn Roses, but I am the only one that spells it with two Y's. You will find all kinds of stuff from me. I have, of course, since I was a teenager and first started learning about Wicca and witchcraft in the early years, I have this website that's still ongoing called Messages in the Moonlight. So that one's moonlightmessages.com is a URL on that one. And it has tons of information about modern Wicca, witchcraft, things like that. And that I've never earned a penny from. If anything, I have spent many a pennies just to keep it going over the years. And I will still keep that going. It's one of those things where I'm pretty sure it is going to always be in my will that, like, hey, keep paying for this. Whatever money's left, keep paying for this. Keep this domain going. Do
Yeah.
not let this go down,
Nice.
because that has been, it was part of my journey learning, but it's also me giving back. So as the universe, I receive from the universe, I want to spread what the universe is giving me. And of course, the best way to keep up on everything that I do is by subscribing to my newsletter, which you will find on the website. I call it the Starlight Circle. Starlight being like the card of tarot of the star. And the star is all of the hopes and inspiration. So I try to include it's only monthly, so I don't blow up people's email boxes. I can't stand it when I receive like 15 emails a
Yeah.
month from somebody, even if I love them, and I'm like, can you please stop?
Yeah.
So it's just once a month, but I try to provide some stuff to help bring a little light into your life. And I also like to call my subscribers my moonbeams,
Aw.
like partly because the moon follows the star in tarot, but also the moon reflects the sun's light so that we can have sunlight in the
Yeah.
nighttime. So if my newsletter brings you a little bit of light, you're my moonbeam reflecting it back out into the world. So
Gorgeous. Yeah.
please sign up, and then I hope to see you there. I mostly am local to the Delaware area in the US, but I'm happy to talk with people from all around the world like I am right now.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Evelyn. What a lovely conversation. So much beautiful insight and so many gifts. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Evelyn today. I'll have all the information about Evelyn and where you can find her. She's got a great website. And I want to thank her for a great contribution to this podcast series. Now, you may have remembered I was going to chat to you about my new program, which is launching in July. So this is called the Year of Emergence. It's a 12-month journey, and there's lots of things going on for you and perhaps your team, or perhaps just for yourself to feel nourished, encouraged, supported, and to feel like you are growing in the right direction. So check out the show notes, check out my website. I'm really excited. You'll hear lots of this. So you'll be hearing a lot about this from me in the coming weeks and months. But if you'd like to subscribe to hear everything about the program, you can find that information in the show notes. Now, if you are here listening still, you will know that we're about to transition into our mindful moment, which is an extra part of the podcast that I offer in the extended version of each episode in series 3. And this is a combination of a few things. It's a mindful moment to allow us to do some creative practice, which is doodling in the form of mini mandalas. If you haven't done this before and you are keen to have a go, there is a little mini workshop on my website that you can check out that'll show you what you need. But really, if you want to take a shortcut, just grab a pen and a paper. That's really all you need. And really, we're just going to be doodling. I love this chance to doodle as a way to reflect on what we've been talking about in the episode, and just to give you a little bit of a taster and a reminder that creative practice and mindful creativity isn't hard. You don't need a lot of stuff. You don't need a lot of time, but it's so good for us. It helps us come back to our body. It calms our nervous system, and it really prepares us for the next thing that we need to go out and do in the world of work. Okay, so here we are back for our mindful moment and some mindful mandala doodling. One thing I just wanted to clarify is that you may wonder if these are actually considered mandalas. These are the ones I was working on last time in episode 2 of this series of the podcast. And for some of you, they may not quite look like the mandalas that you think of when the idea of mandalas come to mind. And one of the things that I like to do with mine is just make them pretty organic, pretty loopy. So they're not fully formal mandalas. They're organic. They don't follow the rigorous kind of structures that a lot of those more traditional mandalas do. But this is just because I like it. This is my style. It makes them fun to draw. So that's just to kind of share with you this idea that we can innovate when we talk about certain things, and we don't always have to do them the way that they can be expected. And for me, this is just what makes them relaxing. I don't have to worry about compasses and rulers and doing things in straight lines. I do love traditional mandalas, but for the purpose of these little doodling moments, these more organic, loopy mandalas are the ones that I like to play with. I just wanted to share with you as well that if you don't have watercolour and you've just got permanent markers, then that's no problem. Why not do just a few black and white little graphic elements? These are lots of fun as well. They're simple, and you don't even have to have permanent markers. I used Posca pens for these, but you could just do it with pen and paper. So really, whatever you do in these mindful moments, just feel free to use what you have. And then I'll just show you, these are some watercolour backgrounds that I've been working on. I'm not going to use them today, but they are just to show you how you might like to. I did actually draw these circles with compasses, so they are a little bit more circular in shape, but that's not to say they'll be any more formal than the other ones I've done. They'll probably still be pretty organic, but I thought I'd show you that's the background that I start with for some of the mandalas that I do. But for today, I just wanted to show you what I'm going to start with, which is, let's see. Yeah, this is just another piece that I've just begun. I'm using just some really nice oranges and pinks here. And because we're talking about spirals today, I wanted to see if I could bring some spiral kind of graphics into my mandalas. And when I say talking about spirals, we're actually talking about spiraling, which was kind of so deeply embedded in Evylyn's lovely words for us of insight into how the path of learning happens. We spiral through these learning pathways and we come back and forth and we repeat our lessons until we've learnt them. But anyway, I'm just going to explore some spiral elements and see what that means to me in the context of these shapes. And you might like to do the same. So let's have a go. So the next thing that we do whilst we are doodling is we are making our way through the A to Z of vibrational language. So it's another big concept. You may be thinking, what is this now that I have to get my head around? Well, really, it's just my way of sharing with you a way of thinking about embodied practice. And embodied practice means being in our body and remembering that our body gives us an incredible amount of information. And It's just a reminder that when we are being overly logical or overly rational or overly analytical, which often we can find out that happening in the world of work, we start to lose connection with this other half of ourselves, which is just as important, which is intuition, imagination, sensory perception. And we can reconnect with that part of ourselves through embodied practice. Now, embodied practice can be a number of different things, and really all it is remembering that we have a body and that our body has a lot of information that it sends up to us. And if we are calm, if we're quiet, if we take a moment for some reflection, some breathing, some creative play, we can start to tap in to that information, which it comes up through the body. It doesn't come in through the brain. So this is the difference. We're trying to short circuit that overly rational side of our brains. We're trying to slow that down and put it aside so we can reconnect with what's coming up through our body. And it can be all sorts of things. It can be subtler bits of information that we may not necessarily take note of in our busy, hectic days, whether we're in the office or traveling around, doing our thing, doing our work, whatever that means for you. This is an invitation to come back to a sense of rest, to rest our nervous system, to reconnect with our bodies, and to connect with the information that's stored there. So we have started on the alphabet and we are now at the letter I. And having said that, we are not going A, B, C, D, E. No, we are just going with whatever letter I think makes sense for the episode. So we are talking about I for integration today. So let's have a think about it. If we are starting to think about integration, if we think about what we are trying to integrate, which is heart, soul, body, imagination, intellect, intuition, all of the things, all of the ways that we work. Integration is incredibly powerful. In fact, it's crucial. But how do we do that through the body? For me, it is through consciousness in a calm state. So you may think about what happens when you journal. So, for example, journaling is a great way to do a download. What's been going on in the day? How am I feeling? What did I do? What did I not do? What do I want to do? What does the next step look like? All of these things can start coming onto the page. Journaling, I think, is a really nice way to start an integration journey because we are in control of the pen. We have the chance to just see what gets written down as we start to tap into all of these things. So that's a great part of the integration process, starting to really sit with our lives, sit with our feelings and our thoughts and our emotions. Integration does require us to sit with things that are uncomfortable. This is part of the integration process. If it wasn't uncomfortable, there wouldn't be any integration to do. So if you do a journaling practice, just be okay with writing things down that aren't necessarily comfortable. So you could even probe that a little bit. What did I turn away from? What did I avoid? How did I try to navigate something that making it awkward or uncomfortable? So even if we start to look at how we live our lives, sometimes we can see ourselves taking shortcuts to avoid things that we kind of are uncomfortable with. It may be we're trying to avoid conflict, we're trying to avoid difficult conversations, we avoid looking difficult things in the face. Like if something isn't working, sometimes we try and get really busy so we don't have to think about the thing that's not working. Integration is about slowing down enough to start looking at the things that are not working or the things that we're avoiding or the things that are hard. And it's not slowing down to say, right, if I look at it, I will solve all of my problems. That's really not what integration is about. Integration is just turning up to be present with the hard stuff. So it is just about allowing it to surface, giving ourselves permission to be present with something, a puzzle that we haven't yet figured out how to solve. Okay, so I just thought I'd share with you how I'm going with my little micro mandalas at the moment. So these are the ones I've kind of gotten to a point where I'm kind of happy with them. They're just kind of playful. You can see I've just been exploring spirals in a few different ways here, which I quite enjoyed because I don't really kind of use a lot of spiral motifs, but they're quite fun. So they're the ones I've kind of finished up and cut out and put aside. And I wanted to show you all the bits that I've got left over from my A3 piece of watercolour paper. And what I really want to say is don't throw this stuff out. When you end up with all of these scraps, really try and find the bits that you can keep. So, for example, that's cut into a nice little moon or a little hill or mountain, and I'll be able to use that for another shape. And there are heaps of shapes that I'll be able to get from all of these different cut-offs. So do that as a part of your process, and that'll give you a whole pile of little pieces to work with when you next do some doodling in watercolour. So that's just my note on cut-offs. I've still got a few which I haven't finished yet, so I'm going to just keep working on those and just add a few more little elements. You'll see here that half of them are still kind of not quite cut out, still in kind of draft mode, but that's giving me a little bit more time to play and enjoy the process. Okay, I've probably said enough for today. I hope this has been a nourishing practice for you. I hope to see you again on the podcast, and take good care. Till then, I'm Jordan Harcourt Hughes, and this is Sacred Stories of the Spirit.